propane tanks for forklifts that work every day right here at the factory. And it was a minimum wage.
Excuse me.
Power wash guy did it. So if he can do it with no college or no high school education, you and I can
Pardon
do it,
me.
right?
Pardon me.
Where's the ground? The ground is.
You want to ground
tank
you want to ground the big tank to the little tank. Right.
That's
Yeah. Right. It doesn't have to be grounded in the ground. Now it doesn't hurt if your tank's sitting on the ground and this tank's sitting on the ground too. But you want them at least grounded together. But technically, anytime you take like a metal gas can and you're pouring it into your car, you should ground it.
Airliners, if you want to fill the planes, they'll run a ground line to the road and then they'll fill it up.
Industrial OSHA and NFPA will tell you if I'm in the industry.
All right, guys. About to get started here. Yeah, there are ants at the base of that tree.
Thank you, I've already.
Hey everyone, just so everyone knows, there are ants at the base of this tree. You'll get eaten alive. Okay, I wanted to start with plant propagation by teaching you what is wet soil and what is properly moist soil and what is dry soil. This is maddening to me that most people I've come across to are having problems with growing plants. They've either got this soil or this soil. So anyone who's interested in coming through here and feeling, because you need to feel it if you want to really know, if you don't know, that is wet, that is bad. We don't want soil like that.
What are the two middles?
This is moist, this is perfect.
Yeah.
If you got a little handful of it and squeezed it in your fist, let me show you. Got all these twigs in here. A little bit of moisture should come out. See it squeezing out from my fingers? Mm-hmm. That is perfect. If I squeeze that as hard as I can, I don't get much out. And like, again, like we talked about earlier, this should just hold together and not just immediately break on me. If I have dry soil, it's immediately breaking apart, okay? This will kill a plant. This is almost good right here. This will still bust apart, but it breaks really easy. This is a little bit too dry. See how if I just kind of crumble it like that, let it fall through my fingers, it falls relatively smooth and even like this. It doesn't clump up. If I drop this, it clumps up more when I drop it. That, see how much water's coming out?
Mm-hmm. Get that in front of the camera again, please.
It's almost mud.
Yeah. Look at that. He probably got a teaspoon of water out just by squeezing it.
Whereas that's, you get like a couple drops
Right.
slowly trickling around his fingers.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't even squeezed one all the way out yet, but it still
I can
feels
feel it.
moist.
I
Yeah.
can feel it
moist.
moving, I just didn't see it drop.
Right.
That's a little, yeah, that's more flaky.
Mm-hmm. Y'all see the difference? Anyone else that wants to come up here and see this? This is one of the most critical things. If you get this right, you'll have such an easier time with plants. And the difference is this, what this is going to promote is anaerobic conditions. Roots actually need to breathe. They need air. They exchange gases through their tissues.
Too wet, right?
Too wet.
Yep.
Perfect.
Just right.
Just right. A little bit too dry. And then dead plants. Okay? I worked for someone who was convinced that I had to water this person's plants until there was standing water almost all the time on top of the soil surface. If she walked out and touched it and her fingertip was not wet, it was dry in her estimation. I touch this and I have to, squish it to make my fingertip wet. So that that person's plants miraculously died every week. And the instructions were to water it more. So please don't do that to your plants. They need air. It's okay if they go to this moisture level, but it needs to go from this moisture level to this moisture level. Yep, fire ants back there, don't stand by the tree. Got a latecomer. Okay, I'm gonna set these off to the side so anyone who's interested can check it out. So, what do y'all want to learn about first?
All of it.
All of it, yeah.
Sticking, softwood cuttings, hardwood cuttings, grafting.
Softwood.
Softwood? All right. We are right next to a future mist bed. Excuse me. So here we have a last year abandoned project. Jack got too busy. Shoot, my mist bed didn't even run last year, or this year. This pipe right here is a manifold. This feeds these mist heads.
Rocky soil.
Yeah. This is a solenoid valve, and this is electronically controlled with an irrigation controller. And this is specifically designed to be a propagation controller. And propagation controllers are different than other irrigation controllers because these will run in increments of seconds versus minutes or hours. Most irrigation controllers will run in increments of minutes. And what you need to be able to do is dial it down to seconds at a time. And for most people in most areas of the country, you're going to be shooting to start out with, until you dial in your system for the season, and an interval of like 10 seconds on and 10 minutes off. Just kind of start with that. And then what you need to do is observe your plants. And what you'll find is the leaves will get wet, and then what you're aiming for is the moment the leaves are starting to dry off and they're about halfway dry, you want this thing to click back on. You don't want those leaves to ever dry out all the way, especially for a few minutes. It's okay if they just barely dry off and they're fully dry, and then immediately this thing clicks on, but that kind of window is what you're looking for. And I can't tell you exactly what that's going to be for where you are. I can't give you a general number that's going to work everywhere. Because some people, the humidity is lower. Evaporation happens faster. Some people have more wind, and so there's just more air movement, so evaporation happens faster. Some people, it's really humid, and it changes with the season too. So just try and shoot to close that same, there's ants underneath that tree too.
Nick, are you familiar with a wet leaf sensor?
Yes, okay. Some people love those. I do not trust them as far as I could throw half of you people.
Why?
The reason is, it is a pressure sensor. It feels the weight of the water on an aluminum panel. So it's an electronic leaf, is that what you called it? Electronic leaf, wet leaf sensor. It's got a panel, and there's a trigger that connects when it's wet and when it dries off, it's unbalanced, and it opens the connection or it closes the connection when it's unbalanced, and it triggers the solenoid to turn on. And then when it gets wet, it opens that connection like it's just a toggle switch kinda, and it turns the irrigation off. Now, if you have nothing that can fall on that thing, then it works fine. But if a bird poops on it, it's on all day long until you figure it out, or until it gets rinsed off. If a frog decides, hey, I like all this moisture, and a tree frog hops up on there and sits on that thing and, oh, this is just perfect. It's dry everywhere else but here.
Actually, Nick, the one I was thinking of, it's actually a small disc.
Mhm.
It's not a weight thing. When there's water droplets on it, it measures the resistance of the water.
Oh,
And
okay.
as it dries, the resistance goes down or up or whatever it does, and it activates it again.
Okay.
So it's more of an electronic.
I haven't seen those.
Okay.
So maybe those would be good. I haven't tried them, so I
Okay.
can't really say.
All right.
But I really like this. And this works.
Low tech.
It's, well, I think this is a little bit more reliable than most. What's that? These are about,
75.
are they 75 now?
Right around that.
Yeah, I think so.
About 75 bucks. But we can fit about 144 plants per square foot in this bed. And we've got a little bit less than, 32 square feet right here. So that's a lot of plants. And how many plants does it take? There's ants underneath that, Kern. Ants at your feet. It won't take very many plants to make back the investment of something like this. 75 bucks. It's not that much. To me, it's definitely worth it.
Wouldn't that run bigger than just one of these beds, though?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. You pop this open.
6 zones.
But all things being constantly pouring this off one soil, right?
Yeah. Depending on your water pressure.
Slide it down.
There it is. There are 6 ports here, so you can plug in 6 different solenoid valves.
Is that battery powered?
It is battery backup.
Okay,
All it does-
powered.
All it does is hold the program.
Right.
It will not
So-
operate.
So AC operates the solenoids.
Right.
Okay.
So you just keep it plugged in, and I did this so Jack could just plug in a garden hose right here, but in an ideal situation you just have this plumbed directly to a pressurized system. And some people ask about rainwater catchment. Can I run this on rainwater? I've encouraged Jack to use rainwater because his water is liquid calcium, and that's not good for plants that are already stressed because they are cut off of the parent plant. So if you have hard water, try and use rainwater because it's going to be a lot more appropriate to what you need to happen. If you have tap water, like city water that's chlorinated, go ahead and use it if that's your only option.
What about softened water?
Softened water is still going to be pretty bad because there's going to be a lot of salt in it, and plants don't much like salt. So I say go with soft well water if you have it, or rainwater. Those are your first 2 options, and then it's probably municipal water next, and then hard well water or softened water last in your preferences. And so this is super simple to do. It sounds kind of complicated and daunting to some people, but it really is simple.
Hey, Nick, can I
s-
interject one thing?
Yes.
The brass hose connection.
Mhm.
Make sure you use your brass hose connection and not the PVC
Yes.
ones because they're junk and they fall apart.
Yeah. The PVC connections.
They leak all over the place.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that. If you do have a failure, you might get a couple hours of life out of your plants. So you need to make sure this thing is set up and run properly or else you'll come home one afternoon and thousands of plants are dead.
Well, wouldn't you
Ask
need
me
to
how I know.
filter the water then before? I mean,
Yes.
How easy is this to be?
Yes,
plugged
he,
up?
I don't know where the filter went, but I did have a filter here. It's just one of those canister filters from Lowe's. You don't have to get,
Inside the
it's inside, okay. It's just one of those screw-on canister filters. You don't need super fine mesh. You just want to filter out any sediment that's going to clog these needle valves up. And these pop open so you can clean them. If you push this all the way down, it's shut off. Okay? You open it up like this and it sprays out a fine mist. And these are a little bit hard to find. I found one place online where you could order them. And I'll look that up and write it on the dry erase board for anyone who's interested. But you don't have to use this. You can use overhead misting systems. You can find mist heads all over the place. The principle is you want the leaves damp with as little water applied to the area as possible. That's what you're shooting for. However you achieve that, it does not matter as long as you achieve that. We don't want big water droplets. So, you know, garden hose sprayers, not a good option because you're gonna move those plants around. You want them to stay still. You don't want to disturb any emerging rootlets coming out of those plants. So sprinkler heads, not a good option. You can get little micro irrigation kits that have all these little bitty sprayer heads, and you could just run a whole bunch of those around the perimeter and point them all in, and as long as you get good coverage, you're good to go. But the principle that you're looking to achieve is damp leaves with as little water applied as possible. And the medium that we use, golly, the medium that we use is not this hard. Gosh. You can go with a potting mix that you've lightened with extra perlite. You want it very, very well drained. What you're shooting for is that damp soil. Remember, the number 2, not the wet one, not the barely damp one or the dry one. We want the damp one all the time. If you're applying too much water, it'll turn into that wet soil and it'll go anaerobic, and any roots that were starting to emerge will rot. And you'll have sweeping failures. So if you keep it damp and you keep the leaves damp, in a few months, it'll turn into a whole new plant that is a clonal copy of the plant that you took it off of. It is an exact genetic replica. It'd be like cutting off my finger and growing a new person from my finger. It would be an exact genetic copy of me.
Is that like a pocket nick?
That would be a pocket nick, if you could fit it in your pocket. Yeah.
Should you program your, if you've got a timer, should you program that to come on in the morning and go off at night?
Yep. Okay, so you want it to come on about daybreak, maybe about 30 minutes after daybreak. You don't need it going on all night. So about 30 minutes before or after daybreak, around that time period. And then all through the day, it's set on the same time interval. Start with, like I said, 10 seconds on, 10 minutes off. And you'll want it to turn off about an hour or two in a brittle environment like this after sundown, because it's still very drying outside. And what we're trying to do is eliminate the transpiration issue of the plants. And what plants do is they breathe and respire through their leaves. The underside of the leaves have little, what look like mouths. If you look at them under a microscope, it looks like kind of like a hand puppet like this. And when they're breathing, they're open and they close when they're stressed. And what happens is they release moisture to cool themselves like sweating. Like we do when we're out in the sun, we sweat. Well, so do plants. They just do it a little bit differently to cool their leaves so that they don't cook. And what we do is we keep them shaded. See, we have a shaded area right here, so we don't have to put shade cloth on it. But Jack's probably going to wrap shade cloth all the way around it to keep the wind from blowing the mist off of it. Because if he gets a nice strong wind, someday he's gone shopping or something. And he's gone for 3 or 4 hours running errands. And it's been blowing pretty steady this direction all day long. The mist turns on and the mist goes, whew, and the mist starts falling down there all day long. And he comes home after a day of that, and all of these plants right here are dead. So put up some windbreak. If it's in a very sheltered spot, you might need nothing more than this. But you need to take into consideration wind can't blow that mist off of your plants, and sun will bake them and make them transpire faster than they can pull up water because they don't have any roots.
Nick, do the plants need any sunshine at this point?
Yes.
How much?
They need filtered light like they'd have here.
Okay.
Dappled light like on a forest floor, or just ambient light is fine.
So that's 80%?
If you had them out in the full sun and you had shade cloth on this, I would say put 60 to 70% shade cloth on it.
Okay.
But
And that
forest floor is fine.
forest floor is fine.
I mean, if we've got light here, it's not direct light.
Correct. We do not want direct full sunlight on them. If it was like in the morning and they got an hour or two of direct sunlight,
Okay.
that's fine. Because that's really gentle light and it's not hot. They're not struggling to survive then. That's fine. But we do not want sunlight on them from noon until sundown. We do not want any direct sunlight on them.
Now, I would think you'd want to mist overnight because you'd get a less evaporation.
You'll start oversaturating your soils. It's
Okay.
not necessary, so don't do it.
Your timer will change because
am
the
I thinking-
evaporation changes. So your interval, which was this during the heat of the day,
Right.
now that interval's wrong for the cool of the night. So you're going to get more water and everything.
Would what I just said be the case if we had full sun exposure and someone was running misting and drip irrigation out in an open field?
You're
I heard
still
somebody tell me-
still shooting for the exact same environmental conditions, whether it's in the shade or in the sun. You're still shooting for the same exact environmental conditions, so that should not be a factor.
So
Okay.
if you had a wet leaf sensor that actually worked perfectly well, set it and forget it.
Set it and forget it.
Yeah. Day, night, it would take care
I
of
actually no, I would still turn it off
it at night.
at night.
Okay.
That's just been my experience that you don't need to run it at night.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
why fix what ain't broke? If you want to experiment with it, go ahead. Let me know how it worked.
All right, so we got the bed set up. Let's say we want to
Yep.
propagate the mulberry.
Okay, so I want to touch on the rooting medium.
Okay.
We put a divider in here so that Jack can run a sand and perlite mix because we want a really coarse sand because we want it to drain well. We don't need good soil in here. All we're doing is letting them grow roots. If they need any fertilizer, they should be getting transplanted by that time because they'll have roots and they're putting on new growth. So we're going to put in a sand and perlite mix here, and then on the other side, a peat and perlite mix. Basically, really light, fluffy potting soil, because that's all potting soil is. If you buy a bag of potting soil, all it is peat moss, perlite, and a little bit of synthetic fertilizer. Maybe a little bit of lime or dolomite lime. That's it.
What's your ratio of sand to perlite?
About 60-40. And that all depends on how fine your sand is. What you're looking for is really porous sand that lets water just drain away but stays moist with the intervals that you're having to use.
Like sand, like 40 perlite?
Sir?
60 potting, 40 perlite.
60 sand.
60 sand, 40 perlite, 50-50 is fine. With the potting soil mix, I'd probably go more like a 60-40 with the peat moss to perlite, or up to like 75%, 25%. And if you're buying the big bales of peat moss, you need to run that through a sieve of some kind to get finer material and not any of those big chunks. Like you see all those kind of big chunks of bark, the peat moss will have kind of sticks and bigger chunks of material in there, and you don't want any of that in there. And the reason is, when you go to pull out these newly rooted plants, you don't want anything to rip off any of those roots. You know, like we had the sand mold. He put those sticks in there to hold the sand in place. So if you had a stick in there and you had some roots underneath it, and you tried to pull that plant out, well, what's going to give first? You're going to rip the stick out or rip those little tiny feeder roots off first? You'll strip all the roots off of that side if that little stick is in there. So what I'll do is, when I go to harvest them, I'll get underneath them with some kind of little dibble stick or a spoon or a butter knife, and I'll kind of lift up on the soil as I pull them out to kind of help loosen that soil as I pull it out, so as to not damage those roots at all. And then you can plant them directly out where you need them, or pot them up, or even sometimes ship them bare root like that. Package them up and mail them to someone.
Have you ever used a coir and perlite mix?
I haven't because it's just so dang expensive where I live. I have to order it on Amazon, and it's just these little bundles, and I can fill up a bed like this for $50 with sand and peat and perlite.
Okay.
Versus I'd probably spend a couple $100 on.
The sand you're getting, is that what I could get like at Home Depot for like kids play sand?
Yeah, play sand is fine, but you're gonna have to cut it with the perlite.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you
Do you have a bed like this at your house, operational?
well, I can make it operational if I just put the hardware back on it.
Okay.
It is not running right now,
All right.
but I do have a bed like this. So we got our substrate in there, and we want to go stick some plants. Let me see if I can find anything that'll approximate it. Give me a second. I'm going to grab a mulberry.
So you're just taking a branch.
Yeah. This is just for demonstration.
Well, he said that one's still okay.
Okay. Get where everyone can see me. So we've got some what will be green wood, and you're going to find green wood. It's going to be the new growth of the year, and we do softwood cuttings late spring to early summer, when it's going to be about 3 weeks to a month and a half after the new growth starts happening in the spring. This is not done in August, because generally you just don't have any softwood to deal with. The kind of classification of the growth goes from greenwood, which is really flexible, bendy, like you bend it and it'll just fold over or snap like that. it'll just kind of break off clean and cleave. And that's greenwood. If you were to try and stick that, it's going to be losing water so fast that it'll just dehydrate the whole plant. So what we do is we cut that off, and that would get trashed. And so now we have, we'll just pretend this is the springtime. Now we have 2 cuttings here. Well, if we try and take this and root it, we're going to be rotting this stuff in the substrate, and that's not good. So we'd clean this off, and I'd probably just leave 2 leaves. If it's a species that has large leaves when it's softwood season, then you'll even cut these leaves off to reduce transpiration. Okay? And we cut them off like that. We bisect that central vein. We don't cut them and strip off half of the leaf like that, because then it's probably just going to lose that whole leaf. We cut it like that. Everyone see that? And then what I'll do is I'll just go and I'll grab bundles of softwood that's ready to go, and I'll cut it all off, and I'll take a huge clump of it, and I'll take it to a bench or a table, and I'll sit down with a whole bunch of it, and I'll have a cutting board or something, and I'll put rubber bands around it in my bundle, and I'll hold it, and I'll hold the basal ends like that, so my hands are well away, and I'll take a machete that's nice and sharp, and that was all still bound with a rubber band. And I come up about 6 inches, and there's another rubber band. Chop it, chop it. So all of these clumps that I just chopped off are about 4 inches long.
That's new growth, right?
And that's all that new growth, and it's all bound up in a rubber band. There's leaves, it's just a big mess, right? And then I hold that bundle, and I'll pull one of these out that's like this. So I pull one out of my bundle, and then I'll just strip, and I'll set that in a little cup of water. And I just strip, cut, cut. Go, 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 go. I am not stressing about how many leaves. 3 leaves, 2 leaves, whatever. Because I'd rather do 100 of these in a few minutes, in a minute, than spend 10 minutes and have 10 of them that were perfect. Right? Because then I'm not too worried if a whole bunch of them die. Because I can fit 100 of them into a space this big. You know?
Nick, what if you're harvesting like not on your own property where you're going to be performing this? Like how much time do you have?
Okay. Good question. So I'll take, let's say this is all new growth and this is all a new growth. Let's say I've gotten all this stuff right here from a neighbor's property, or a property I don't want anyone to know I've been on. Not that any one of y'all would do that. Well, let's say you snag some of this from a friend, stick it in a bucket of water.
Simulates your medium.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, because we don't have any. So I've harvested all this new growth. I want it in water immediately. And I'm not going to worry about stripping any leaves off because I'm about to chop this all up into little pieces, right? So I stick it in a bucket of water and I take it home. A couple hours, that's fine. The sooner you get it treated and stuck in your mist bed, the better. So, got all my cuttings. I'm going to go through and I'm going to evaluate what's good, what's bad. I might just, if it's succulent enough, I might just snip it off. But if it's not, I'll just take my knife and I'll discard the stuff that's too succulent. And I'm just blazing through this. I'm not taking a lot of time to mess with it. And if I just have a few like this, if you're doing small scale stuff just for your own and you only have, you know, a little bit like this, well then just look at this and say, okay, right there, that's my only leaf right there. I'll set that off to the side and I'm gonna go up right there. And you might just go through like this and snip all these. Make sure you keep the basal end oriented right, because you're going to stick the bottom of the stem in the ground, not the top. You put them in there upside down, they're just going to die. No, they don't like that too much. So then, if you just have a few like this, well then just take these, strip them. Like I can see that that's upside down. Most people can tell really easily. But I've had people ask me, so I'm telling you. Based on questions that I've had. So I'm going to collect all these.
So which one's
This one's kind of a eh. I'd probably just toss it. And since I'm being really finicky about this, that one's kind of meh too. But I'll just put it in there. So now I've got a little bundle. And can someone hand me that blue tub right there? Thank you, sir. And now I'm going to treat it. I'll get myself a little cup somewhere where it's not going to fall over, because I don't want this stuff on my skin.
Now, when you talk about plants, are you talking about any plant like apple tree?
No.
No.
Nope.
Softwoods.
Most of your fruiting trees, apples, peaches, pears, plums, nectarines, things like that, cherries, you need to propagate by grafting them onto rootstock. You really shouldn't be putting them on their own rootstock, because we're getting kind of complicated here, but the simple, easy answer is it's just a bad idea because they're more disease prone. So you're not going to be doing this with apple trees unless it's a seedling apple tree that grew on its own rootstock and it's doing well. Then you know you could actually do this. Now, a lot of those will not propagate very easily through softwood cuttings anyways. So what we're mostly doing this with are ornamentals and shrubs. So bushes, understory type things, blueberry bushes, things like that. And so we've got them, and we're going to mix up some rooting hormone. Now, some things do better with a talc rooting hormone. It's the powder stuff. And most things will do best with a liquid. I like the liquid because I can choose what concentration I use. So I can look up in my handy dandy reference manual of woody plant propagation and see what specific concentration of indole 3-butyric acid that the plant does best with. And normally they'll have recommendations on naphthaliniacetic acid and indole 3-butyric acid. And they'll tell you in this book if you need to use talc, because some plants are a little bit more sensitive to alcohol, which is the media that it's dissolved in. That's the carrier in here. But this stuff is pretty nasty on your fingers. Don't get it on you, so wear gloves unless you're just being really careful. I don't wear gloves. I just do this and I just don't get it on me. So you'll put the correct amount diluted in this cup, in a cup. I normally use a little glass, not a measuring cup. If I'm doing a lot, then I'll have a measuring cup or something, but I want something with enough depth that I can fill it up and stick the plants in there and not have it overflow or get on my fingers. So a little spice bottle works great for small scale stuff. Okay? And you just dip it in there, 1, 2, 3. Shake it off, and then I set it off to the side and I let it dry a little bit. And then as soon as it's dried a little bit, we stick them in. See, I'm holding it right there. I'm not holding it at the bottom because then you'll get it on your fingers.
You go down quite a bit down with it.
Yep. You stick them in like that. And if your mist system is set up right, then you just check on them every other day. Check on them every day as you're walking past to take care of your animals or whatever. Make sure nothing's gone amiss with your system. And depending on the species, 3 weeks later, they might be ready to go. It might be 3 months later. It just all depends on the plant. But the way you know is it'll start growing some new growth. And once that happens, get yourself something to lever them out so that you kind of loosen it up like this. See how that soil's kind of splitting? And then pull them very gently out as you're kind of lifting it out, because it'll hopefully have a bunch of roots attached to it. And then what you can do is have a little cup of water next to it and dip it in there and see if it is well struck, which is the term for rooted. So when it strikes, if you're reading stuff on it, I just wanted you to know that's what they're meaning when they say struck or strike.
Tug test also?
A what?
A tug test?
Tugging on it?
Yeah, tug on it just gently. See if you get any resistance.
I would rather take it out gently, and if it's has little tiny rootlets, I would rather gently put it back in there so I don't kill it, because if I tug on it and it's not well struck, then it's going to rip the roots off. If it's just starting and going fine, and I just do that, and there's no resistance, well, that doesn't tell me anything, because they could all be starting to root. It's just so much simpler to just do this, pull it out, and look and see, is there roots coming off of it? If there are, great. If there aren't, put it back.
Any amount of root, any length.
Here's a good rule of thumb. If there are just as much roots in biomass as there is leaf material, you're probably safe in transplanting it. If there's just a couple little tiny roots coming off of it, it needs to stay in there longer, because you're nursing it along until it can take up as much water or more than it needs to transpire.
How long is too long in the bed?
Okay, so now we're getting to it's harvest time. How do I know it's harvest time? Well, if it's well struck, we need to start hardening it off. So sometimes, if you're just doing a little batch of stuff, it might be best to put it in something like this and set it in the area where it's going to get hit by mist. Okay? So you set it in a pot. You know, you could just have a whole bunch of 1 or 2 or 3 gallon pots. And this pot is, I don't know, forsythia, and this pot is blueberries, and this pot is something else. And each pot is a different thing, because some things will root really quick and they're ready to go, and then you need to start moving them away from the mist so that they get less mist and less mist, because some plants, if they get too much mist on their leaves, once they've rooted, they start dropping leaves, and they'll drop leaves and then they'll die. So it's very handy to be able to take that and set it off to the side and come back 30 minutes later and see if they're starting to wilt. You might bring it into the mist and just have it on the periphery of the mist, so they're just getting a little bit of mist. And then start to harden them off, just like you would do if you started tomatoes or peppers indoors. You start letting them experience colder and colder temperatures until they're ready to move out into the garden. And what was the question you asked me?
When can you leave them in too long?
Yes, so pretty much anything, once it has been rooted well, you're going to need to get it out of there before it starts dropping leaves like that. Some things it happens really quick, and other things it can take longer, and it can handle more of that, but too much moisture it'll just start rotting.
So you don't take it directly from the bed to the potting. You have to get some sort of hardening off process.
Well, you can do some hardening off by just cranking this down a little bit or reducing your intervals. So you let them.
The rest of your bed needs.
Right.
That's why the buckets would be kind of a nice
Right.
thing. Okay.
Right, because what you could do is, let's say you find out in your experimentation that this one plant always roots really quick and it needs to be moved out of the mist really quick. What you can do is you can grab that bucket out and move it over here and take this stick up, move it over here, so that this area over here is getting a little bit less mist. And then maybe you just shut this down altogether, so it's just getting a little bit of overspray, and you're hardening these things off. You might find another thing over there is well struck, so you pick it up and move it over here, and one of these is still needing some time, so you fill that hole. And that way you can kind of graduate those plants out of this system. And then once they're ready to go, like I said, you just dig them up and put them wherever you want them. Pot them, plant them into your landscape. They can go all winter in most places in the country in this mist bed. Once the weather cools down and they're well struck, you just turn the mist off, you can grow them in here. Now, if you leave them in there for a long time, the roots will start intertwining and it'll be a lot harder to get them separated. And you'll be pulling out kind of a mat, and you might need to soak it to get the roots broken up, to separate them all out. You might end up having to cut roots to get them to break apart. But you can overwinter them like this. So, questions on this?
So it grows all the way until you see new growth on top, and then
Yeah.
start hardening.
Yeah.
And then,
I would wait until you start to see new growth. Some things, it's such a depends. You're probably just going to want to be peeking at them all the time. So just pull them out and pay attention to how those roots are developing, and compare that. Oh, the roots, it's got 10 roots on it now, and oh, it's starting to bud out a little bit. And you'll learn the quirks of that one plant. And then you'll be able to just at a glance as you're walking past say, oh, those are just about ready to go. And not even look at them at the roots. You just stick it over there, and you know when they look like that, they just need to be at the edge of the mist. And then you know in a couple weeks you're just going to be setting them up out underneath the shade and just watering them. And then maybe you'll break them all apart and stick them out into a grow bed, or pot them up, or take them to a friend or a family member.
What's the difference between softwood cuttings and how they're treated versus hardwood cuttings?
Okay, we're about to go into hardwood, but I want to make sure I get all the softwood cuttings answered.
So that's a spring and
Yep.
early summer method.
Yep.
Is that something you would do just once a year? Or would you, like, if they come up quick, then you would maybe get another?
Yeah, if you can, if it's still putting on some softwood growth and you can get 2, 3, 4 harvests out of it, great. Some things will even put on some softwood growth late summer, and you can sometimes get away with that. But then your issue becomes, are they going to root enough to be able to hold themselves over winter by the time that, the light levels start dropping and you get that change of seasons like now. I would not even try sticking any softwood cuttings now, because they're not going to make it into fall, because they'll get the signals to start going dormant and they don't have any roots, and they'll just peter out and die. Wow, I must have explained this really well. 2 questions.
How do they make hormone?
Kevin's not a tree person, so what are some examples of softwoods?
So the softwood that you're harvesting is in the springtime as it's putting out new growth.
But I know about I'm thinking hardwood versus softwood. So it could be any tree has softwood is what you're talking about.
Correct.
Not
Every
not like a
plant,
trees.
correct. Not softwood trees and hardwood trees as in oaks and pines. It is the stage of growth.
Got it. That makes more
We have greenwood, then it turns into softwood, then it turns into semi-hardwood, and then it turns into hardwood. Once that wood is hardened off, all of the branches on this tree are now hardwood. In the spring, it'll send out greenwood shoots. They'll harden off to softwood, and then to semi-hardwood, and then fully to hardwood. And once they've kind of turned into hardwood, they're a lot more difficult to root in kind of a mist system because the cells in the cambium are like plant stem cells, okay? And they're called meristematic cells, like stem cells. And in that cambium, especially at the nodes, at the internodes, there are a lot more of those stem cells, those plant stem cells. So if you're getting really picky about how you make your cuts, you'll make a cut right underneath a node, because that's where more of them are. And
When you say node, a little notch in the branch?
yep, the internodes of the leaves. So at each one of these leaves, that is called an internode. Okay? And if you can see, these are closer internode spacings, that's slower growth, and the further apart the internodes are, is the more rapid that growth is. But those are internodes. And the softwood has more of those stem cells, if you will, than the hardwood. The hardwood, they kind of have done their job and they're a little bit more dormant. So that's why we want to take them when they're softwood, because it's ready to grow. Okay? And we'll go over how to propagate hardwood cuttings in a minute, unless I run out of time. I think we're good. Any more questions? Did you have a question on the hormones?
How did they make hormones?
Oh, I don't know. That's a mystery.
Can a sequoia, if one was tall enough to get to the top of a sequoia, would they be one of those examples, or that's not the way you do it? Not sure?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Curious.
I've never tried to.
The apple tree is one example where you don't do this.
Right.
Are there examples of trees you wouldn't even try this with?
Like I said, any of those fruiting trees, I generally just don't even bother with those.
And it's not because they wouldn't grow, it's because they would get attacked by disease because they're not on resistant rootstock, right?
Well, and they don't propagate very readily from softwood cuttings like that.
But a mulberry tree does, right?
Yes, mulberries do great. Yeah, it's really, species by species. If you really want to know, get one of these books, because almost everything that you're going to wonder about is in there, and it'll give you appropriate and reliable methods. Reference Manual of Woody Plant Propagation by Durr and Hauser, Charles Hauser and Michael Durr. And I'll have that out, so anyone that wants to snap a picture of it or write down the title and author can. Anything else? We're good?
We're good.
Hardwoods, all right. So, all right, let's pretend we got some hardwood cuttings. They have gone dormant. All the leaves have dropped. It is winter, the beginning of winter. Now the peach trees have dropped, or you wouldn't be doing this with peaches generally. You can do this with peaches, but it's generally not the best idea. Hey, Triple. So you're going to take these whips of that year's growth, that current year's growth. So it's 2015, the winter of 2015. We want the growth from 2015, not 2016. And you can tell because there will be a marked difference in the appearance of the bark on almost every species. The current year's growth will be smoother and waxier, and the previous year's growth will get more bark-like. Will get rougher. And so you'll take these, and actually, they'll look like this by the time they're hardwoods. I need Patrick to sharpen my knife.
That was a different one, right?
Yeah, this is a different one. So here is our hardwood whip. It's got a nice piece of hardwood right here, and we're gonna take about 8 foot to, you could take 2 foot sections, but sorry, foot. 8 foot, 8 inch. Where's my coffee? 8 inch to 12 inches. So let's just say here. I don't know where my pruners are.
I saw them here somewhere. They're in your bucket, I thought.
No, not my pruners.
I saw a set laying over there.
Those aren't, no. I didn't bring them, is what I'm trying to say. So my hardwood cuttings, I like to, when I cut them, I'll snip them off like this, and then I'll take that cutting and I'll cut it at a bevel, at an angle. So the base, the basal end, the end that's closest to the roots, everyone follow me with this? There's an apical end, the apex, the top, the tip, and there's a basal end, the base, the bottom. The basal end always goes in to make roots. And it's best if you have a bevel on it, an angle. So when you're cutting it in the field, cut it at an angle so you know which end's what. Most of the time it's really apparent. But sometimes you'll have a pruned off piece, and if you're not paying attention carefully enough, you know, you're just going, you might end up getting some stuck upside down. Because if you're not paying attention to what the buds look like, that can happen. But generally you can just look at it and see the buds point up. Or there's bud scars that point up. So that's a hardwood cutting. So all our softwoods are gone. And it's early winter. And we've got a seedling bed or just a raised bed that we're not using. That one's done. Sure.
So why do we propagate hardwood instead of softwood? It sounds like hardwood's more difficult to do. Is it just
Hardwood, I need about twice as much material to get a plant out of it. Softwoods, I can take multiple trimmings off of the same plant in the same growing season. Hardwoods, the softwoods, I've got little pieces. Hardwoods is generally about twice as much material, and I can only make one harvest a year. So off of one tree, if I let it go and just harvest hardwoods, I might get 20 pieces off of it. Versus the same tree, if I could propagate it through softwoods, I might get 2 cuts off of it, and each cut is twice as much, so I might get 4 times the propagation material.
do some plants just not propagate from softwood?
Some don't do very well from softwood, and they do fine with hardwood. Again, I don't have enough room in my head to remember even a handful of them. That's why I rely on those.
The book will say
Yeah.
red bud or firebush, best done with softwood.
Right.
Firebush or best done with hardwood.
Yeah, let me just look up something here.
Redbud.
Get out of...
Redbud's a good tree.
Okay, here we go. Salix. We got willow. So it tells you about willows, it tells you about the seed, cuttings, and grafting. So cuttings, most willows are readily propagated by softwood or hardwood cuttings as they have pre-formed root initials. Softwoods, comma, peat, perlite, under mist, root in high percentages. So that tells you softwoods in a peat perlite medium, under mist, root really well. Hardwood cuttings can be collected and prepared for insertion at any time after leaf fall, provided they are well ripened from November through March. Now, they say they give you months, but it's different if you're in the north or the south. So take that with a grain of salt. But like they said, after leaf fall and after it's well ripened, if the leaves just fell off of the tree, it's not well ripened. If there's still leaves hanging on it, it is not ready. Generally, I say give it a week or two after all of the leaves have fallen off of all the trees in your area, except for trees that obviously don't drop leaves, or leaves hang on it dead like beeches all winter long.
So it seems like kind of a seasonal thing.
It
Like
is.
if I'm not as busy as I am in the spring.
It is a mad rush in the spring and a mad rush in the fall.
Might be a better time
Right.
to work into your lifestyle. Like we're going to propagate hardwoods.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And hardwoods are a lot lower tech. It used to be that almost everything was propagated through hardwood cuttings. That was, 30s, 40s, even into the 50s. That was almost everything was hardwood propagation.
So there's no stimulating that.
You don't have to. What I try to tell people is, if they're just getting started with this, then they're the people listening to me. And if you're just getting started with this, please do every single little thing to give yourself an edge and an advantage, because I want you to be successful. Because if you just experience failures with this, then you're going to give up, and I want you to get the bug, because we need lots of people making lots of plants. So use some rooting hormone. It's not that much per cutting, and it'll give you a little bit of an edge. Sometimes it produces almost no discernible results for you, but sometimes it might give you just a little bit of an edge because you screwed one thing up, or you weren't quite spot on with another aspect of how you harvested, or they're a little bit stressed or whatever. If it gives you a little bit of an edge and bumps your success rate up from 40% to 60%, it's worth it.
It's like cheap insurance. You already have it there, so.
Right, and it's like, this was like, I think $20, and you can buy little bottles of it for $4 or $5. And
Just use it then.
yeah, just use it. So I'd bevel the bottom cut, and I'll cut the top one off. And if I'm paying attention, I'll cut about, these are awesome, about 1/4 of an inch to 1/3 of an inch above a bud. And I'll stick it in.
You're doing this in the dormant season.
Dormant. After all leaf drop. If that happens, don't stress. Snip it off. Dip it in your rooting hormone. And see, I've got 2 bevels in it. Threw me for a loop. Bam. And they're good to go. And
So
these,
how long you
you do not put mist on these.
Just water.
You need to make sure this soil stays moist. That's it. Don't let it get wet. Don't let it get dry.
How long?
Until the spring and it starts growing. And then go in there and with the knife and lever it up and see if it's rooting. If it's rooting well, plant it.
So a really cold climate where it's going to freeze out out there?
Mulch it.
Huh?
Mulch it.
Mulch it?
Yep. And that's generally the best thing to do with this anyways. Mulch it. If
Cover
you,
the whole thing in mulch? I mean,
yeah, mound up mulch on
5
it.
inches, 10 inches,
Yeah, a foot.
dig it out in the spring.
Yep. And if you're in a colder climate, you're probably gonna have voles. And so what I would be doing is I'd have a bed like this, and the bed would be lined in 1/4 inch hardware cloth, and I would cover it in hardware cloth. And I'd make sure it was weighted down or screwed down, and I would put the mulch in amongst the cuttings, slap some hardware cloth on that, and then pile up some more mulch on it, and they'll be cozy, they'll root well for you, and then just, you know, once it starts warming up, pull some mulch off and see if they're starting to sprout out. Once they start sprouting out and trying to put out leaves, get the mulch off of them, just lightly rake it off them with your hands and take the hardware cloth off of them. You want to protect them from rabbits. If you have rabbits, rabbits will love eating that new succulent growth, especially off of woody species. Any more questions on hardwood cuttings?
It's the same substrate.
Just potting soil, just something that's going to keep it consistently moist. I wouldn't use the sand and perlite stuff. I'd just put it in your native soil, in a raised bed, some good potting mix. One of the best things you can actually do this in is well-rotted wood. Well-rotted wood.
You're not gonna have any problems with like fungus.
It's because it's going to be mostly dominated by fungus that's going to be beneficial to them. Because that fungus is going to be fungus that breaks down rotten wood, dead wood. And what you're putting in is live wood. And it's going to have a lot of beneficial fungi in there, and it's not going to be the saprophytic disease-causing stuff. You can put them 1 inch, 2 inches, up to 1 inch, but I mean you could space them out 1 foot, whatever floats your boat, whatever you need for your situation. Because you might want to stick them like this as hardwoods and dig them up 3 years later after they look like small trees. So if you're going to do something like that, well then you might want to space them out 3 feet so you can get in there and dig all around their roots and dig them up as bare roots and sell them for $50 a piece.
Now you said you don't want to mist the hardwoods.
Correct.
And
The mist is for softwoods only.
So if I've got a 2-year-old softwood in there, it still gets mist?
You really should not have a 2-year-old softwood cutting in there.
Okay, so hardwoods you may keep in there for a little bit longer. The softwoods, you're pulling them when they're rooted and moving them out.
Yeah.
Well set, I mean, not rooted.
Yeah, well struck. Once they're rooted, whatever. I just wanted people to know if you're reading up on it and they're talking about if it's well struck, I didn't want you to struck. You hit it? But yeah, as soon as they're rooted well, you really ought to get them out of a mist situation and get them planted somewhere that they can mature. Because if they're stuck in a mist bed like this, they ought to be close together because you don't want to just waste your space.
Right.
And if you really don't want to grow that many, then sure. If you don't want to grow a whole lot, but you want to build a bed like this, then fill it full of the peat perlite material, and then you're going to be likely like foliar feeding them. Because the thing with this, the material in here, you do not want a lot of nutrients in this. You don't want any nutrients in this soil, really, because you don't want a lot of negative bacteria in here. So if you start fertilizing this, then you can actually burn the root primordia. So you want this pretty inert and just like a medium to hold the plant upright, just until it gets roots out, and then you move it to a fertile situation where it can grow. So the purpose of this is just to get roots, and once it's got roots, You get it somewhere it can grow. But with the hardwoods, because they don't need that extra water, you can stick them out wherever you need them to grow. And as long as you keep them moist, you can just leave them there for the rest of their lives. Cool. Does anyone know how much time I have?
I think dinner's on.
I haven't heard the bell ring.
Yeah, I haven't heard the bell ring.
Okay.
It's going to be a little while before dinner. There's people running the stores, but
All right.
Like, where do the containers fit in this? Is that growing things from seed instead of propagation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's different.
Yep. That's mostly for planting little seeds and growing them like that. I'm not a huge fan of the containers. For some people it works great, but I'm not going to screw around with something that costs me extra money when I can just put them in a bed and just dig them up when they're ready.
Seeds in a bed like this?
Not with the mist. Well, I guess I could with the mist. I just have to program it differently.
Same media?
Not with the sand, no. No,
Soil,
that's getting pretty complicated. You can do that, but yeah, I'd use soil like we made for those wicking beds.
Okay.
That's what I'd do. So I'd like to go over a little bit of grafting real quick. Is that cool? Yeah? Okay, so with grafting, I want to sit down.
Hey, coffee?
I'm good.
There was an ant on that cup. So
It was in the what?
an ant on the cup.
Oh.
Eat it quick.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a little grafting tool. It has a blade right here that comes down to a backstop. See that?
Show me.
So when I hear you talk about grafting knives, this is a grafting tool.
This is a grafting tool.
Different than a grafting knife.
Using a grafting knife is a skill and an art form. And if you're just getting into grafting, this is a whole heck of a lot easier. So that's why I like showing people how to use one of these. You're gonna want to go in between internodes. You don't wanna be cutting through that node because it's gonna make it hard to match up the cambium layers. And that is the whole point of grafting. That's the whole goal, is to get cambium layers to match up.
So by cambium layers, you're talking like
Okay,
when you cut a tree down, each ring is a different cambium layer?
It's an old cambium layer. The only cambium on the tree is going to be this green layer.
Okay. Okay.
It's the inner bark.
All right.
So we got outer bark and inner bark. See that green layer right there?
And you only do hardwood crafts?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
So the outer bark on this is very thin. If y'all want to pass that around, you can see the cambium. Does anyone need to see that really up close? And what we're trying to do is match up from our scion wood, the cambium on it, to the cambium on the root stock wood. So that could be a tree this size, and I could go on one of the branches right there and I can find an appropriate sized branch, and I could graft onto that branch another oak. I'm not going to graft a peach onto a live oak. They have to be at least in the same genus and preferably in the same species.
That's why the 3-in-1 apples, 4-in-1 apples work out so well.
Yeah, because it's apple on apple. You don't put cherries on apple trees. Well,
Apple on apple.
yeah. So it's easiest if you can find material that's calipered the exact same. So this is just a really simple, like $3 caliper right here. You don't need anything fancy.
you're doing a lot of that, would a digital caliper make sense?
It doesn't matter because all you're doing is, oh, I'm fitting that, and then you go through your pile of rootstock. If you're bench grafting, you got a big pile of little seedling trees. And you go, nope, nope, yep, perfect, right there. Make sure I got the right one, right size, yep. And once you have your rootstock, we're just gonna pretend like this is both our rootstock and our scionwood. And here's my rootstock. Rootstock, this is an omega blade pattern, and it's like the omega symbol, okay?
Makes it easier to match up.
See your tool.
It's not exactly an omega, but that's what they call that blade pattern.
I thought it was just a straight blade.
It's not just a straight blade.
No.
So one is cutting the omega symbol and one's cutting
Yep.
the
So you
inverse of
cut
it?
one from one side and one from the other
you
side.
take
No.
them together.
No?
No, you just cut them both the same.
You cut them both at the same time. So you want to make sure that you don't cut your scionwood as a female and your rootstock as the female.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay?
So you do. So the answer is yes. If your rootstock goes in from this side, you cut. Your scionwood goes in from this side, and you cut.
Yep. You don't turn the thing around.
Right.
You keep it all oriented the same way. And
the art comes in with the knife, right?
well, you're not cutting an omega with a knife.
Right.
There's other.
Well,
There's
like the Batman symbol.
Scarf.
yes. Okay. That's probably a whip and
Get a
tongue that
picture of
you're
it,
you're talking about, a whip and tongue.
Yeah.
Or a modified cleft, maybe. Well, there are dozens of cut patterns for how we could graft, but I just want to teach y'all the principle and like,
That's wicked easy.
yeah, this is really easy.
So you're bringing in your scion wood from one side, and you're
Right, so we either have a little sapling piece of rootstock, and you might buy rootstock that's a hardwood cultivated piece of rootstock from a nursery, and it's just got a bundle of roots coming off of it, and there's your rootstock. So let's say we're trying to get this rootstock to marry up to that. Are they the same? No.
Can it be done?
Sure.
yeah. It depends.
Sure,
right?
because all we need to do is match the cambium to the cambium, right? So, get this oriented right, and I want my blade to be in the center of the wood. I don't want it canted off to the side because then it's going to be really hard to match my scion. And I cut that. Okay.
The blade makes the same size tongue no matter how.
It makes the same size no matter what the diameter of the wood is. Then I'll take this.
So when you're cutting a piece in half, one side gets
Oh.
the actual symbol, the omega, and the other side gets the inverse.
Yeah.
Right, that makes
How much is the tool, Nick?
Like 20 bucks.
No.
Yeah. I think that's what I paid for it. I can't remember.
Amazon right now.
Yep.
That's badass.
And then
Obviously, you can't match up both sides. You just match up one side.
voila.
As much as you can.
Okay.
Is that an ant tree that I'm standing underneath?
Yeah, I've
Okay.
told you about 3 times.
Yeah, you have.
So what do you do now with it?
Very cool.
Tape.
Now, we need to make sure it doesn't dry out. Name of the game with plants, can't dry out, right? Where's my tape? There it is. This is the stuff I use. What Jack had is not what I recommended. I don't know what he had. I think he had some kind of tape, but hey, it worked.
Yeah, it worked.
You can use Teflon.
Medical tape.
You can use paper tape. You can use electrical tape. Lots of things will work. all you're trying to do, all you're trying to achieve, again, I talk about the principle. You're trying to achieve the principle of keeping the leaves wet and the substrate damp with the softwood cuttings. Same principle here. We're trying to keep this, however you achieve it, doesn't matter as long as you achieve the principle. And the principle is to keep this sealed, tight, and keep it from drying out.
Is there a
And,
wax
yeah,
or something you could put on that? Or?
If we just slather something on there, it's not likely to stay tight. So we want to keep it tight. So
What did they do before we had tape?
they would tie it with, they would put pitch on it to seal it, and they would tie it with string. So they'd tie it with string to get it tight and secured, and then they put pine tar on it. Okay? But yeah, jute twine. Yeah, but we don't need to do that because we have parafilm. Parafilm is used in burn care.
Stretch it.
So you stretch it out and we get it tight. And I'm going to make sure that as I'm doing this, I keep that wood tight on there, and I'm overlapping. And as soon as I can, I switch to holding the scion wood because I don't want to rock it back and forth. Because if I do this and I pull on this, what'd I just do?
You bent it.
I just bent it, and now is the cambium touching? Nope, cambium's not touching anymore.
What are you hoping to achieve with grafting over, say, the cuttings?
Grafting is a way to take an asexual propagation method. They're both asexual propagation. This is putting the clonal piece of a plant on top of a beneficial rootstock. So this rootstock might have a type of vigor or disease resistance that I desire for the plant, the tree as a whole. And I might not be able to get that with growing this piece on its own roots. So a lot of apple diseases will move through the apple tree through the roots. It'll be pulled up in the soil and move up to the top of the tree. And a lot of the root systems of resistant trees will transfer that resistance to the rest of the tree. So that's why most nurseries, most orchards, almost pretty much every single orchard out there, commercial, grafts. They plant grafted whips.
Let's say you have a pear tree or a plum tree, wild plums. They don't taste that great.
Mm-hmm.
You get a good plum tree,
Mm-hmm. Grafted on it. Yeah.
What are you going to have? Good plums or bad plums?
Whatever comes out of this and grows from this is going to be the same as this.
Good plums.
So here's
Good
an
plums.
example. We did the property walk with that apricot tree. If you remember Jack talking about it, it blooms
Too early.
Too early.
early. You get that late frost, all the bloom's gone. So cut that back, and then you can graft onto it
A later blooming.
the species that you want.
The cultivar.
Okay.
Yeah, the variety that you want.
Variety one. Okay. The and apples, like if you take an apple and you throw a seed in the ground and it grows and becomes an apple tree, you have no idea what that's going to be. I don't know why that is with apples. It just is. Like it's not going to be the same species of apple that you just ate. It won't taste the same.
Yeah.
So that's why they graft apples, because I want a specific
Right.
cultivar.
Every single Granny Smith apple, if you see an orchard with 1,000,000 Granny Smith apples in it, every single one of those Granny Smith apples is an exact clone of the very first Granny Smith apple. It's the exact same thing. So if you had a genetic weapon that only targeted Granny Smith apples,
There's no resistance. It would target every single one.
every single Granny Smith apple would be susceptible to that because
Well, they're having that problem
they're all
with
the same.
bananas.
Yes,
But take that Granny Smith apple, take a seed, plant it.
you don't get a
you
Granny
don't know
Smith.
that you're going to get Granny Smith.
You will not get a Granny Smith because it is sexual propagation now. Pollen from one tree pollinated another and you get something different. Just like you have two dogs that look different, you don't get an exact genetic replica of either parents. They're a combination.
Even two Granny Smith trees pollinate
Right.
each other.
Right.
Is there
Because the Granny Smith tree was a seedling tree of two different parents. So there are different recessive and dominant traits.
So we've been cloning for a long time, basically.
If you had
That's what
sex
we've
with your
done.
clone, your clone's kid wouldn't look exactly like you.
Sure.
Right.
I hope not. Is there a certain time of year that you should or shouldn't?
Yes, okay. So most grafting like this is going to be done right around bud break in the spring. So right when the buds are starting to swell and getting the tree is pushing sap up into the limbs and getting ready to put out leaves and flowers, that's about the time that you want to be grafting.
And will that graft leaf out the first year?
Yes, that's what you're hoping for.
How long till it's stable on there?
Okay, you don't want to touch this or mess with it. Don't try taking this off and see, is it ready yet? Until it's got like 6 inches of growth on it. And even then, with the parafilm, don't touch it.
Just let it grow.
Leave it alone.
It'll come off on its own.
Let it grow. And if you're grafting something like this, don't graft it like that, coming off of a limb. Graft it like that, because you want the strength on the upper side.
Of your joint,
Yeah.
So how did you?
Put the matching side up.
Yep. Because that's what's gonna heal first, and then the cambium is gonna swell around. I don't know if we can see any.
The graft should have the longer piece of the cut on the top side. That
Yeah.
Make sense?
That's best.
If it's cut in an L and the other one's an opposite L,
Mm-hmm.
the longer piece of material on that graft should be
Yeah.
above.
If you have
So
to
gravity's
mismatch it
pulling
like
in.
this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'd graft them like that. If they're perfectly matched. Now, most things you don't have to worry about because you're just going to be grafting on the same size material, and it's going to be growing up right like that.
So what if you're so you need to take your scion wood at the same time that your rootstock's ready? Like
That's
if
best
they're both-
if you can do that. Otherwise, you can take your scion wood up to 6 months before, but really the fresher the better. And generally what people will do is they'll harvest scion wood and they'll keep it refrigerated, like wrapped in moist paper towels for a few weeks to a month before it's time to graft.
So, especially if you're working with your fruit nut trees and you're doing your pruning when they're dormant, back to that Jack talked about. He said if you can throw a cat through it, it's good, but if a bird can fly through it, it's not so bueno. Like when you're cutting, when everything are dormant, all the leaves are out. Yeah, like that was the old adage, like wives' tale of how to know what to prune off, and then all of that is scion wood when you're doing it.
Correct.
It was the
Well,
other way-
not
it was the
all
other
of it
way
is.
around. You don't want that cat to get through there.
Okay, correct. Like the new year's growth, that year, the previous year's growth
Correct.
is your scion wood.
Correct.
Okay.
Any material that you would have taken for a hardwood cutting, like we talked about. So if you're going into grafting season of 2016, you only want to take material from the tree that grew in 2015. Okay?
Last year's green growth.
Correct. Last year's growth.
Is that a self-adhesing tape?
Yes, it is self-adhesive. It's like a waxy tape. If anyone wants to play with some.
Is it like that silicone stuff where it bonds to itself?
I don't know, it's wax and it sticks to itself.
Would you be hurting, let's just say an apple tree, if you grafted a very early, or a couple very early, a couple early, a couple mid-season, a couple late, and a
No,
couple very
that's
late?
actually a fantastic method for getting the most production in a space that you possibly can, because what the tree is going to do is it's putting all of its energy into ripening fruit, and if it can space that out over a longer period of time, then it'll put energy into these early ripening ones.
So, but you're not
and
going
then
to screw up your early ripening ones by the next set starting to bud out or starting
No.
to flower out or whatever.
Yes and no.
Okay.
If you let the tree get really imbalanced, then you can advantage the really vigorous growing cultivars and disadvantage the slower growing cultivars, to the point where you can actually, the tree will actually just let those slower growing cultivars limbs die.
Right.
It'll say, you're not worth it because this stuff is growing crazy.
Gotcha.
In fact, if y'all want to, we can walk through and I want to show you something that you want to be careful of in letting your trees grow. I want to show you all this tree over here, a peach that's gone a little crazy. I think it's that one right there. Oh yeah, it's these two.
What's retail on that book? $50, something like that.
I think it's like 20, 30 bucks. Yeah. Well worth it just to have as a reference.
No doubt.
Okay, anyone that wants to see this better, get close and look at the difference between these limbs on the outside and this central one, just the bark.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You see the difference? The color? Can you see any difference between the way the leaves look on the two ones?
Greener than the other.
Okay, this one is a darker green leaf
Yeah.
and a little bit wider.
Right.
You think they look a little bit like different cultivars, perhaps?
Yeah, almost like one's coming from the rootstock.
Yeah. This is the rootstock. This is suckered up.
This should have been cut off.
This should have been cut off this spring. And if you let this happen, if you let these limbs get above the grafted one, what happens is it selects the apical growing material and it is dominant. So anything below that gets left behind. If you let trees do this for long enough, the graft will die. The center will just die out and you'll just have a rootstock tree in its place.
Can you trim this at any time, or I mean, if you just chopped it off right now, would it?
I wouldn't chop it off right now,
Shock it or
and that's why we haven't already. We're gonna let it put all of its energy back down into the roots, and we're gonna cut them off once it's dormant. Cut all this rootstock material off once it's dormant, and then in the spring it's gonna have all that energy stored up, and it'll be raring to go, and it'll send out a whole bunch of new
Where would
growth.
you cut that because it's way
Flush.
down there? So,
As flush with
down there.
Yeah, as flush with the base of this tree as possible.
But then you
Nick,
just
around
watch
here,
for
you're
new.
talking December, January.
So when would you do it?
After it is fully dormant, probably January, February.
Now, if you had a choice, would you cut it down off as soon as it popped out, or would you
Yes.
let it grow up like that?
I would cut it off as soon as it was popping up out of there.
Throughout the year, anytime you see a
Yes,
sucker.
every time. Whenever you see rootstock suckers, snip them off immediately.
So always carry your cutters with you.
Yeah. Sir?
Everything? Like what would be left? Just the center part?
Just the center part right here.
Okay.
I would even, this right here should go also.
Okay.
If you want to see what it should look like, turn right around here. Except for this little guy right here.
That little guy?
This should go. This should go. These were planted at the exact same time. Look at the difference in the caliper.
Yeah, all that other energy's gone into growing.
All of this could be over there, except this one, I butchered this back, and we have the beginnings of a nice scaffold system in there.
Is this just a straight tree though? Or was this grafted?
This is grafted too. Here's the graft right here.
You do both of these at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
Is that a goose murder problem with the other one? Like
No.
got into it?
No. It just
did it.
Yeah.
That way.
Jack just didn't prune off those suckers when they popped up.
That could have been into
Yep.
Until it grafted. Got 'em in.
So that tree pretty much lost a whole year of growth.
We'll still get
It could-
peaches out of it. It's
but-
still going to happen.
Yeah, it's just a year behind.
What would it be the root or the thickness of the trunk or something that determines when these fruit, like how old they are before they fruit?
Actually, that's a good question. And so we don't have to move the whole group again. There's a tree over there that the graft failed. The graft failed on another peach tree down there, or nectarine, I don't know. It's a prunus something or another. And Jack just let the rootstock go. I said, just let it go because then you can graft onto it if you want to. You could graft one of every single cultivar that'll grow on that rootstock from your whole food forest. So let it go. And if you don't want to, then it'll make if it's peach rootstock, it'll make Lovell most likely, because it's most likely Lovell rootstock. It'll make Lovell peaches, which aren't good for eating, but it'll make peach pits. And you can take those peach pits, collect them, plant them in a seed bed, and now you have peach rootstock popping up from seed, which might be nice. You might want that, might not.
If this were say you wanted to graft something onto this one here, is there a certain branch you would say, oh, this looks better, or just?
Well, there's probably like 100 options.
Okay. So don't fret it. Just
No,
do it.
just do it.
Do you want to pick one as straight up as possible, if that's possible? Or does it
Maybe.
really matter?
Maybe. It really does depend, and that's getting into like mid-level, more advanced type stuff. I wouldn't be grafting onto this tree most likely, but if I were to start grafting, I would probably pick some of these lower whips down here, because I'd want to get my grafts from lower on the tree, because I'd want those scaffolding out and producing fruit where I can still reach them. I don't want to graft up there, because then it's going to grow up that way and then fruit up there, and I don't want to have to climb ladders to pick fruit if I can avoid it. So I would be coming down to like these lower limbs. I wouldn't come to one that's pointing down. I'd want some that are pointing laterally or a little bit of an upward angle.
So how would you start trimming this to, I mean, I guess you said you've already trimmed it to...
Well, it's going to be really hard for me to show you because it's all in leaf right now.
Okay, you trim it.
But any branches that are crossing other branches, go. Any branches that are going into the center of the vase structure, go on this one. And any of them coming straight up into the center of this vase, go. And it's different for peaches, plums, nectarines, and things like apples. Apples, you want to have a central leader with a nice scaffold of branches coming off of it. And peaches, you want them opening up because you want a lot of air and light inside them.
Plums too?
Yeah, plums too.
What about like any downward?
Okay.
You kill off any downward branches? Or
Yeah. Yeah, most of those are going to be really weak, and look at how little this has grown compared to something growing up and out. This has got a lot more light and energy available to it, and this is just going to grow real slow because it's in the shade and you're not going to get fruit set. You probably won't even get blooms on that.
So the tree knows, don't worry about those little
Right.
guys. Let's put
Yeah.
the energy over here.
Mm-hmm.
What's that about?
What was the question?
How do you train a tree?
How do you train a tree?
Yeah.
Um,
Or explain what it is.
get a book on tree trimming, on pruning fruit trees, and start practicing.
That's what training is.
That's
It's
training.
pruning it to grow
It's
in the
it's
shape
pruning
that you
it in
want
the
it to
shape
grow.
that you want. So I trained this tree away from a central leader by cutting out that central leader, and I trained it into more of a vase shape. Look at how these branches are coming out like the silhouette of a vase. You follow me? That's training it. I just cut away the material that is doing something I don't want it to do. And I leave the stuff that's going in the direction that I want it to go. And this will probably all get pruned back to about here this winter.
At that height.
Yeah.
Is
We'll-
that just
we'll
'cause
come-
you want to keep it to where you can pick it without a ladder?
Right. We don't want it to just get all wild and scraggly. Because it's already been pruned and trained before, you kind of need to keep going with it. There's some instances where it makes sense to just let them have their natural shape. But once they've been messed with and manipulated, then it's
You can't
kind of,
stop.
yeah, it's kind of like you can't stop. So we're about out of juice, but I'll be available for more questions later this evening if y'all would like.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.